All right, so today, let's do a little bit of time lapse. Like that. So what is the time lapse? Well, a time lapse is nothing more than us taking one picture after the other, and then we're going to put them in order in a video format. So a time lapse compresses the standard time, which is the time we live in, and we compress that down into a short period of time. So if it takes us 2 seconds to take the pictures one after the other, because that's generally the fastest we can go with a time lapse, then we compress it to 30 frames per second. We've taken 1 minute and compressed that down to 1 second. Now, if we take longer periods of time to shoot our pictures, if we shoot them 5 seconds apart or 10 seconds apart, then we can speed up the time lapse. So in essence, we can make a day go by within a minute. So it's not hard to do time lapse. All it takes is just some basic equipment that you probably already have. And we're going to look at that as to what we need to create those time lapses and how to do them so they look really nice, and what programs to use in post to blend them together to make them stand out from all the others. Let's take a look at the stuff we need. For time-lapse, all we need is just a camera body, a lens, and a nice solid tripod. Invest in a nice solid tripod, an expensive tripod, because you don't want the wind pushing the camera around. You want this thing to stay in one spot once you start your time-lapse going. You don't want any movement at all in the camera. Now, while you're doing the time-lapse, you could sit here and push the button every 2 seconds or every 5 seconds to do your time-lapse, but then you run the risk of moving the camera every time you push that button. So you want to invest in a timer cable release or an intervalometer. This allows you to set up time so that it will send a signal to the camera every 2 seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, whatever time you set, and it will take that picture. So once you get the whole program going, you can just leave the camera alone. And that's exactly what you should do for your time lapse. Once you get the time lapse going, you don't touch anything, because if you move anything or adjust it, that's going to shift that whole frame. And you want the frame to stay exactly the same. All you want to record is the movement that's happening in the frame or outside in the real world. So for time lapse, camera, lens, good tripod, intervalometer, and you're good to go. So for shooting modes, you have 4 modes basically available to you. You have full program mode, you have aperture priority, and you have shutter priority, and you have manual. Well, full program mode you should never use. That's going to change too much on the camera from shot to shot, and it's not going to look good when you put them all together to create a video. Shutter priority is not one that you want to use also, because that's going to set the shutter in one spot, and then you're going to have the aperture adjust as the lights change. When the aperture adjusts, it's going to change your depth of field. So one frame you might have a background that's in focus, the next frame is going to be out of focus. And when you put those together in a time lapse, it's just going to keep popping in and out of focus, so it's not going to make for a good time lapse. Aperture priority is one that you can use because that's going to change the shutter. The problem with that is that eventually the shutter is going to get so slow that things are going to blur quite a bit, which is going to sort of look natural. If you're taking a picture towards sunset, things are going to be sharper while the light is on there, and as the sun goes down, the light gets lower. Things that are moving are going to blur a little bit more, so that's sort of going to look natural. So aperture priority is okay to use too. But it does change, like if you're out in the daytime and you have clouds coming over the sun and it gets light and dark, it's going to make adjustments in there to change around the way that the picture looks or the exposure that the picture has, and that's going to make a difference on the time lapse too. So aperture priority will work if you don't want to worry about having to reset everything every once in a while. Manual mode's about the best, because once you get your exposure, unless you have drastic changes throughout the day, then I would use aperture priority, but most of the time when I'm shooting time lapse, I use manual mode. That way if the sun goes in and out of the clouds, it looks natural, the fact that it gets lighter and darker as the sun goes in and out. So manual mode is probably the best thing to use unless you're shooting like sunrises or sunsets where the light drastically changes. Then you might want to consider aperture priority mode. So f-stop is so important in time-lapse. What f-stop should you use? Well, you want to shoot, in most cases, with the aperture wide open. And the reason for that is that when you shoot with the aperture closed down, like at f/22 or so, when it closes down, it doesn't create the exact same size opening every single time. It's very close, but not exactly. And so that's going to change the light value in the picture. And when you put them side by side in a time lapse, you're going to see what's called flicker in there, and that's what causes that at some point. So the best idea is to shoot wide open whenever possible. Now, during the bright sunny day, that's going to be kind of difficult to do, and we'll talk a little bit of how you can accomplish that. But in most cases, shoot whatever aperture is going to make the proper exposure and get your shutter down close to 1/60th of a second. Shutter speed. What's the perfect shutter speed for time lapse? As a rule, we want to get it to about 1/60th of a second or close to that. And the reason for that is that's twice the speed of what our frame rate is. Generally, videos are going to be produced at either 24 or 30 frames per second, roughly. So our shutter speed, if it's at 1/60th of a second, that's going to give just enough motion in there so that things blend together. And if things blend together, that's going to give you a better look in the time lapse. Now, if we shoot a fast shutter speed, what happens is that you freeze the action. So somebody is here and they're frozen, then they're here in the next frame and they're frozen, then they're here in the next frame. When you blend those together, there's no blur movement to keep them together, to sort of connect them. And you can add that in post, but sometimes it's better to get it in the camera when you're shooting. So if at all possible, always try to get right around 1/60th of a second, 1/25th of a second, right in that area. But if the daylight is so bright and you want to shoot wide open that you have to go up to 1/1000th of a second or so, go ahead and shoot that and look at that time lapse and see what you think. It'll be a little jumpy, but it'll still be kind of a cool look. So setting up your intervalometer is pretty straightforward. If you want to take a picture every 2 seconds, you set it for 2 seconds, 5 seconds, etc. But you do have to think about what your shutter speed is. So even if you have like a 1/25th of a shutter speed or 1/60th of the shutter speed, you still don't want to go below 2 seconds. And the reason for that is that when you take a picture in the camera, that image, especially if you're saving in RAW, that image is going in a buffer inside the camera, and it's going to start writing to the card. And writing to the card takes a little bit of time. So you want to make sure that it completely writes the card before the next picture happens. So if you buy a faster card, that whole process will work much quicker. But also you want to make sure that it takes and puts everything there before it goes to the next shutter. Because what's going to happen is eventually those shutters are going to build up that buffer until finally that buffer can't take any more shots, and you'll take a picture and it won't register. And then your time lapse will have one picture out of sequence every 10 maybe, let's say. So you want to make sure that you set this timer so that it extends past the time that you normally have. So if you're taking a 30-second exposure, I almost always set my timer for like 34 or 33.5 seconds to give that buffer time to process to the card. The way that you can tell if your buffer is cleared is that, like on Canons, we have a little light back here, so when we take a picture, that light is lit up until the process of saving it to the card is complete, then that light goes out. So if this light on the back of my camera goes out before the next shutter clicks, then I know the buffer is completely clear and I'm not going to get any buildup or backup in the buffer later on down the road. So set your intervalometer or set your time so it's a little bit longer than what the actual shutter speed is, whatever that may be. Wait, don't forget to subscribe and hit that little bell so you get notifications on any new videos that I come out with, because you're going to want to know how to put that video together.